What if everything we've been taught about the discovery of the Americas is missing a crucial piece of the puzzle? Long before Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492, whispers of other journeys, older, bolder, and far more mysterious, linger in the shadows of history. Scattered across the continents, from the dense jungles of Central America to the windswept shores of Newfoundland, strange artifacts, cryptic carvings, and baffling legends hint at visitors who arrived centuries, even millennia, before European ships ever appeared on the horizon. Were there pre-Columbian voyagers who crossed vast oceans, leaving traces of their presence in the unlikeliest of places? The idea isn't just the stuff of wild speculation. It's a question that has puzzled archaeologists, historians, and adventurers for generations. Take, for example, the Norse sagas that speak of Leif Erikson's voyage to Vinland around the year 1000, or the controversial Kensington Runestone in Minnesota, covered in strange markings that some claim are medieval Scandinavian. Then there are the enigmatic Olmec colossal heads in Mexico, with features so distinct they've sparked theories of transoceanic contact with Africa. Even ancient Chinese texts and Polynesian navigation traditions suggest journeys that might have reached these shores long before recorded history. Each clue is a thread in a larger tapestry, weaving together a story far more complex than the textbooks let on. But why does this mystery matter? Because history isn't just a static record, it's a living, breathing narrative that shifts with every new discovery. If evidence of pre-Columbian visitors holds up, it reshapes our understanding of human ingenuity, connection, and the relentless drive to explore the unknown. Were these early voyages accidental or part of something deliberate? What cultures might have met, traded, or even clashed in these forgotten encounters? Over the course of this journey, we'll sift through the evidence, separate fact from folklore, and ask the boldest question of all: how much of our past remains hidden, waiting to be uncovered? Strap in, because what you're about to hear might just change the way you see history forever. One of the most fascinating theories suggests the Phoenicians, master sailors of the ancient Mediterranean, might have ventured far beyond their known trade routes. Around 600 BCE, these seafarers circumnavigated Africa under orders from the Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, a journey so daring it was considered legendary even in ancient times. Could they have pushed further west, riding ocean currents to the Americas? Some researchers point to similarities between Old World and New World writing systems, like the mysterious Bat Creek stone found in Tennessee, inscribed with characters resembling Paleo-Hebrew. Others highlight the sudden appearance of tobacco and coca, plants native to the Americas, in ancient Egyptian mummies, raising questions about transatlantic trade long before Columbus. Then there's the case of the Chinese explorer Zheng He, whose massive treasure fleets sailed the Indian Ocean in the early 1400s, while mainstream history credits his voyages only as far as East Africa. A controversial map known as the Zheng He World Map allegedly depicts parts of the Americas decades before European contact. Skeptics dismiss it as a later forgery, but if genuine, it would rewrite the timeline of global exploration entirely. Perhaps the most compelling evidence comes from Polynesia. Using nothing but the stars, ocean swells, and ancestral knowledge, Polynesian navigators settled islands across thousands of miles of open Pacific. Recent studies of sweet potatoes, a crop native to South America but found across Polynesia centuries before Columbus, suggest these voyagers might have reached the Americas and returned home with more than just stories. Chicken bones discovered in Chile, dating to pre-Columbian times and genetically linked to Polynesian fowl, add another layer to this tantalizing puzzle. But were these crossings intentional, or just the result of ships blown off course? The Norse sagas describe deliberate exploration. Leif Eriksson's journey to Vinland was no accident. Yet other cases, like the tale of the Japanese fisherman blown to North America in 1834, remind us how easily ocean currents could carry vessels astray. Whether by skill or chance, these fragments of evidence paint a picture of a world far more interconnected in ancient times than we ever imagined. And if that's true, what other stories of forgotten voyages still lie buried beneath the sands of time? Of all the pre-Columbian voyages, the Norse exploration of North America stands as the most thoroughly verified, a rare case where ancient sagas and modern archaeology align perfectly. The Icelandic tales of Leif Eriksson's journey to a land he called Vinland, rich with wild grapes and timber, were long dismissed as legend until 1960, when a team uncovered the remains of a Viking settlement at Elance Ox Meadows in Newfoundland. The site's turf-walled structures, iron forge, and Norse artifacts match the saga's descriptions down to the smallest details, proving these seafarers not only reached the Americas but built homes there over 5 centuries before Columbus. Yet the mystery only deepens from there. If the Vikings had the skill to cross the North Atlantic and establish a foothold, why did they abandon their settlements so quickly? Climate records suggest the region was slightly warmer then, making survival feasible but not easy. The sagas speak of hostile encounters with indigenous groups the Norse called Skraelings, likely the ancestors of the Beothuk or Micmac peoples. Were these clashes the reason the Vikings left, or was it simply the sheer difficulty of maintaining a colony thousands of miles from home? Some researchers argue the Norse may have viewed Vinland less as a permanent settlement and more as a seasonal outpost for gathering timber and other resources to ship back to Greenland. Even more intriguing are the hints of cultural exchange buried in the sagas. One account describes trade between the Norse and indigenous people furs for milk or red cloth, while another mentions a Skraeling child who learned Norse and claimed his people already knew of Christianity. Could there have been more sustained contact than we realize? Recent discoveries of Norse artifacts farther south, like a possible Viking mooring stone in Massachusetts, raise the tantalizing possibility that their explorations reached beyond Newfoundland. The story of Elance Ox Meadows isn't just about who arrived first. It's a window into the unpredictable nature of early encounters between distant civilizations. Unlike later European colonization, the Norse presence was fleeting, leaving behind no lasting footprint beyond a few scattered clues. That absence makes their story all the more compelling. If a culture as well documented as the Vikings could vanish from the historical record of the Americas so completely, what does that mean for other, less tangible visitors? Every broken tool and charred seed at Elance Ox Meadows whispers the same question. How many other voyages have been lost to time? Imagine setting sail across the vast Pacific in nothing more than an outrigger canoe, navigating by the stars, the swell of the waves, and the flight patterns of birds. No compass, no maps, just generations of knowledge passed down through song and story. This was the reality for Polynesian voyagers, some of history's most extraordinary navigators, whose feats of exploration dwarf even the celebrated voyages of European explorers. While the Norse were braving the North Atlantic, Polynesians were conquering the Pacific, settling islands scattered over an area larger than the entire landmass of Eurasia. But did their journeys stop at the edges of the Pacific? Mounting evidence suggests they may have reached the shores of South America centuries before Columbus, leaving behind clues that challenge our understanding of pre-Columbian contact. The sweet potato is at the heart of this mystery. Native to South America, This humble crop somehow found its way across the Pacific to Polynesia long before European ships arrived in either region. Carbon-dated remains of sweet potatoes in the Cook Islands trace back to around 1000 CE, while linguistic clues add another layer of intrigue. The Polynesian word for sweet potato, kumara, bears a striking resemblance to the Quechua term kayuma, used by indigenous peoples of the Andes. Could this be a linguistic fingerprint of ancient contact? Genetic studies of modern sweet potato varieties across the Pacific seem to confirm the connection, showing a direct lineage to South American roots. But the evidence doesn't end there. In 2007, archaeologists excavating a site in Chile made a startling discovery: chicken bones dating to between 1300 and 1450 CE, long before Spanish colonists brought poultry to the Americas. DNA analysis revealed these birds weren't local, they were Polynesian. Since chickens weren't native to the Americas, their presence suggests someone brought them across the ocean. Add to this the remains of Pacific coconuts in pre-Columbian Panama, and the shared techniques of surfboard construction between Polynesian and Peruvian cultures, and the case for transoceanic contact grows even stronger. How did Polynesians accomplish these epic voyages? Their double-hulled canoes, or wakolua, were engineering marvels, sleek, stable, and capable of carrying dozens of people, plants, and animals across thousands of miles. But the real secret lay in their navigation methods. Unlike European sailors who relied on compasses and landmarks, Polynesian wayfinders read the natural world like a map. They memorized the positions of hundreds of stars, tracked subtle shifts in ocean currents, and even interpreted the behavior of marine life. Clouds gathering over distant islands, the direction of migratory birds, even the refraction of sunlight on lagoons, all were clues woven into an intricate system of knowledge passed down through chance and apprenticeships. Critics argue that these crossings might have been accidental, the result of storms blowing canoes off course. Yet Polynesian oral histories tell a different story. Legends like the tale of Huiti Rangara, who supposedly sailed into Antarctic waters, or the Maori account of the explorer Cuyp reaching New Zealand deliberately, speak to a culture that didn't just drift, it explored. The sheer scale of Polynesian settlement, from Hawaii to Rapa Nui to New Zealand, suggests a pattern of intentional expansion, not random chance. If Polynesians did reach the Americas, what might those encounters have looked like? Unlike later European colonizers, Polynesians weren't seeking conquest or conversion. Their voyages were likely driven by trade, curiosity, or the search for new resources. Imagine the scene: a South American coastal village encountering a canoe filled with strangers speaking an alien tongue, exchanging exotic goods, or perhaps sharing knowledge of crops and sailing techniques. These fleeting interactions, if they happened, left no grand monuments or written records, only subtle traces in language, botany, and DNA. The legacy of Polynesian voyaging isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a testament to human resilience and adaptability. In 2016, the Hoax, a replica of an ancient Polynesian canoe, completed a 3-year circumnavigation of the globe using only traditional navigation methods, proving once and for all that these journeys weren't just possible but repeatable. As we piece together the fragments of this forgotten connection, one thing becomes clear: the story of human exploration is far richer and far more interconnected than we ever imagined. And somewhere beneath the waves of the Pacific, untold stories of these daring voyages still wait to be discovered. Of all the clues linking Polynesia to the Americas, none is more puzzling or more delicious than the sweet potato. This vibrant orange tuber, native to the fertile slopes of the Andes, somehow crossed thousands of miles of open ocean to take root in Polynesian soil centuries before Europeans set foot in either region. The implications are staggering. If the sweet potato couldn't have floated across the Pacific on its own, who or what carried it? The timeline tells a compelling story. Radiocarbon dating places sweet potatoes in the Cook Islands by the year 1000 CE, with other Polynesian islands adopting the crop soon after. But here's the catch: sweet potatoes don't survive long in seawater. Their thin skins bruise easily, and salt water quickly rots them. While a few hardy seeds might occasionally drift between continents, an entire tuber making the journey intact seems impossible. Even if by some miracle one did, it would need human hands to plant and cultivate it, which begs the question of whose hands those were. Linguistics adds another layer to the mystery. In the Quechua language of the Andes, the word for sweet potato is cayuma. In Polynesian languages, it's kumara, a similarity too striking to dismiss as coincidence. When languages borrow words, they often carry the cultural context with them. This subtle linguistic echo suggests more than just a stray plant washing ashore. It hints at face-to-face contact, an exchange of knowledge between peoples who shared more than just crops. But not everyone agrees. Skeptics argue that ocean currents could have carried sweet potato seeds clinging to debris, or even that birds might have transported them. Yet genetic studies complicate that theory. Modern sweet potatoes in Polynesia show distinct markers linking them directly to South American varieties, not wild strains. Even more telling, some Polynesian cultivars contain genetic material from two separate South American lineages, strong evidence that multiple introductions occurred, something unlikely to happen by chance alone. Then there's the question of motivation. Why would Polynesians risk such a perilous journey? The answer might lie in their own traditions. Polynesian voyagers weren't just explorers, they were agriculturalists, carrying coconuts, taro, and breadfruit to every new island they settled. A hardy, calorie-rich crop like the sweet potato would have been a prize worth sailing for, especially as populations grew and resources dwindled on smaller islands. The same navigational skills that led them to pinpoint specks of land in the vast Pacific could have guided them eastward to the continents beyond. What's often overlooked is how this exchange might have flowed both ways. While Polynesians potentially brought back the sweet potato, they might also have left something behind. The chicken bones found in Chile, for instance, or the shared techniques of fishing and boat building seen in coastal South American cultures. The ocean wasn't just a barrier, it was a highway, and the sweet potato might be one of its oldest surviving road signs. The debate continues, with each new study adding nuance to the picture. In 2018, researchers examining ancient DNA proposed that Polynesians might have reached South America around 1200 CE, the perfect window to explain the sweet potato's spread. Yet without a smoking gun, a Polynesian artifact unearthed in the Andes, or an indigenous South American legend describing foreign sailors, the full story remains just out of reach. What makes the sweet potato so extraordinary isn't just the mystery of its journey, but what it represents, the quiet, everyday evidence of human connection. Unlike grand monuments or gold treasures, it's a humble food, something planted, harvested, and passed down through generations. Its very persistence across time and space suggests that these ancient encounters weren't fleeting accidents, but meaningful exchanges that reshaped diets, languages, and lives. In the end, the sweet potato doesn't just challenge our textbooks, it invites us to imagine a world where the ocean was never empty, but alive with the sails of explorers whose names we'll never know. Imagine a fleet so vast it could blot out the horizon, massive wooden junks with crimson sails, some stretching over 400 feet long, gliding across the Indian Ocean under the command of history's greatest admiral. This was Cheng, his treasure fleet, a floating city of diplomats, scholars, and sailors that sailed between 1405 and 1433, reaching as far as East Africa in voyages that dwarfed anything Europe could muster at the time. But what if these expeditions didn't stop there? What if the same winds that carried Cheng his ships to Arabia and beyond also propelled them across the Pacific to the shores of the Americas? The idea isn't as far-fetched as it might seem. Chinese maritime technology in the early Ming dynasty was unmatched. Cheng his flagship, the treasure ship, reportedly had 9 masts and carried a crew of over 500. These vessels weren't just larger than European caravels, they were floating fortresses equipped with watertight compartments, magnetic compasses, and detailed star charts. While Columbus's Santa Maria measured a modest 85 feet, Chinese junks were built for endurance, capable of surviving months at sea. If any civilization had the means to cross the Pacific deliberately, it was Ming China. The most tantalizing piece of evidence comes from an enigmatic document known as the Cheng He World Map. Discovered in 2001, this map purportedly dates to 1418 and shows not just Asia and Africa, but what appears to be the western coasts of North and South America. Proponents argue it depicts geographic features like the Gulf of California with startling accuracy details Europeans wouldn't document for another century. Skeptics counter that the map could be an 18th century forgery, but if authentic, it would upend everything we know about the timeline of global exploration. Then there are the artifacts along the Pacific coast of North America, from British Columbia to California. Unusual stone anchors resembling those used in ancient China have surfaced. In 2002, a fisherman off the coast of Oregon hauled up a mysterious circular stone with markings some claim resembled Chinese script. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss these as natural formations or later colonial debris, but for believers, they're physical proof of pre-Columbian contact. Cultural parallels add another layer to the mystery. Some indigenous oral traditions along the northwest coast speak of Iron people arriving from across the sea long before Europeans. Could these stories describe encounters with Chinese sailors bearing metal tools? Even the sudden appearance of blue-eyed chickens in South America, a breed genetically linked to Asian poultry, has been floated as potential evidence of trans-Pacific exchange. But why would Cheng his fleet sail east instead of west? Ming records describe the treasure voyages as diplomatic missions, meant to awe foreign rulers with China's might and bring exotic goods back to the emperor. Yet some scholars speculate that Cheng he might have sought alternative routes after the Yongle emperor's death. When China's inward turn began, the fleet was dismantled, records burned, and maritime ambitions abandoned, but not before perhaps one last, unrecorded voyage into the unknown. The biggest hurdle to the Cheng he hypothesis remains the lack of definitive archaeological proof. Unlike the Norse settlement at Eland's Ox Meadows, there's no smoking gun, no Chinese porcelain in pre-Columbian layers, no undisputed Ming artifacts in American soil. Yet absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. The same storms that could have scattered a fleet across the Pacific might also have swallowed its remnants whole. And if Chinese explorers did reach the Americas, their goal likely wasn't conquest or colonization, but fleeting contact, trading silk for parrot feathers, or sharing celestial navigation techniques before turning homeward. What makes this theory so compelling isn't just the possibility of rewriting history books, it's the reminder of how much we still don't know. The ocean keeps its secrets well. Whether Cheng his ships ever glimpsed American shores may remain unanswered, but the very question challenges us to reconsider the boundaries of human ambition. In an era when most cultures hugged their coastlines, the idea that a Chinese admiral might have dared the Pacific speaks to the timeless urge to sail beyond the edge of the map. Deep in the heart of Minnesota, a farmer named Olaf Oman made a discovery in 1898 that would ignite a controversy still burning over a century later. While clearing trees on his land, his plow struck a flat stone covered in strange, angular markings, a 200-pound slab of greywacke that would become known as the Kensington Runestone. The inscription, carved in a medieval Norse script called runes, told a chilling story. A group of 8 Goths and 22 Norwegians on an expedition from Vinland had camped there in the year 1362, only to meet a tragic end. 10 men red with blood and dead. It read, claiming the survivors had been attacked by indigenous peoples. If authentic, this stone would shatter the timeline of European presence in North America, proving Norse explorers ventured far beyond Newfoundland, deep into the continent's interior over a century before Columbus. But from the moment it surfaced, skepticism followed. Critics pointed to glaring inconsistencies. The runes mixed medieval and older forms, while the language seemed oddly modern, peppered with phrases no 14th century Norseman would use. The stone's discovery by a Swedish immigrant, someone likely familiar with runic alphabets, raised eyebrows, especially when neighbors recalled Oman joking about creating a hoax to fool scholars. Even the stone's location seemed implausible. Why would Vikings trek over 2,000 miles inland from the coast, leaving no other traces along the way? Yet defenders of the runestone refuse to dismiss it so easily. Geologists note the weathering on the inscription appears ancient, with mineral deposits filling the carvings over centuries, something difficult to fake in the 1890s. Linguists counter that the odd phrasing could reflect a dialect lost to time, or even the influence of indigenous languages on isolated Norse travelers. And in 2020, a team using 3D scanning technology argued the tool marks match medieval Norse chisels, not 19th century farm implements. The most tantalizing clue might lie in the stone's mention of Vinland, a name matching Norse sagas describing Leif Erikson's Voyages. If the Kensington party truly came from Vinland, it suggests Norse settlements persisted longer than believed, possibly evolving into semi-permanent bases for further exploration. But without corroborating evidence, a Norse axe, a campsite, or even a single coin, the runestone stands alone, a riddle wrapped in a mystery. What's fascinating isn't just the debate over its authenticity, but what the stone represents about our hunger for lost histories. Whether a medieval artifact or an elaborate prank, the Kensington runestone forces us to confront how easily the past can be rewritten or invented. For every scholar who sees a clumsy forgery, there's another who glimpses a fleeting moment of contact, a whisper of Vikings where they were never supposed to be. And in that tension, the stone's true power emerges, not as proof, but as a provocation, daring us to question which stories we trust and why. Standing over 9 feet tall and weighing up to 20 tons, the colossal stone heads of the Olmec civilization are among the most striking mysteries of the ancient Americas. Carved from volcanic basalt between 1500 and 400 BCE, these massive sculptures gaze out from the jungles of southern Mexico with an almost uncanny presence: broad noses, full lips, and distinct facial features that have fueled debate for generations. To some, these visages bear an unmistakable resemblance to West African physiognomy, sparking theories of transatlantic contact thousands of years before recorded history. Could these heads be portraits of actual visitors from across the ocean, or are we seeing the artistry of an indigenous culture through a modern lens? The African connection theory gained traction in the 1940s when scholar Matthew Stirling first documented the heads at sites like La Venta and San Lorenzo. Observers noted the sculpture's so-called helmet designs resembled military headgear from ancient Nubia, while the facial structure seemed to align more closely with African than Mesoamerican traits. Proponents like anthropologist Ivan van Sertima pointed to cultural parallels, such as pyramid-building traditions on both continents, or the presence of African plants like cotton in pre-Columbian America. Even the Olmec's sudden emergence as a sophisticated civilization around 1200 BCE has been framed by some as evidence of outside influence, a technological kickstart from across the sea. But mainstream archaeology pushes back hard on these claims. Forensic studies of Olmec skeletal remains show no genetic markers linking them to African populations, while the basalt used for the heads was quarried locally, not imported. Art historians argue that the sculpture's features fall well within the range of indigenous Mesoamerican diversity, with later Maya and Aztec art depicting similar broad-faced figures. The helmets, they suggest, are actually stylized representations of jaguar headdresses, a sacred symbol in Olmec religion. As for the timing of their civilization's rise, scholars point to gradual developments in agriculture and trade, not sudden outside intervention. Perhaps the most compelling counterargument lies in the heads themselves. Close examination reveals intricate details, ear spools, scarification patterns, and headbands that match other Olmec artworks depicting local rulers. These weren't generic faces but likely portraits of specific leaders, each with unique markings signaling their status. If the Olmec truly meant to depict African visitors, why would they carve dozens of nearly identical heads without any accompanying artifacts, inscriptions, or cultural shifts reflecting foreign contact? Yet the debate endures because it touches on deeper questions about how we interpret the past. Human faces are remarkably similar across continents, and our tendency to project familiar features onto ancient art can lead to misreadings. At the same time, the ocean has always been less a barrier than a highway. Polynesian voyagers crossed the Pacific. The Norse reached Newfoundland, so why couldn't West African sailors have ridden equatorial currents to the Americas? The Mali Empire's documented voyage under Emperor Abu Bakr II in the 1300s shows such ambition existed, even if evidence of earlier journeys remains elusive. What gets lost in the back and forth is the Olmec's own brilliance. Often called Mesoamerica's mother culture, they pioneered writing systems, calendar mathematics, and urban planning that influenced all subsequent civilizations in the region. Whether the heads depict Africans or indigenous elites, their sheer scale requiring thousands of labor hours to transport and carve speaks to a society of astonishing sophistication. Maybe the real mystery isn't who the heads resemble, but why this civilization chose to immortalize their leaders in stone on such a monumental scale, leaving behind silent sentinels that still challenge our assumptions about the ancient world. Among the most tantalizing and hotly debated finds in pre-Columbian mystery lore are the scattered Roman coins unearthed across the Americas. From a bronze coin of Emperor Augustus found deep in the Brazilian jungle to a handful of Roman-era artifacts discovered along the eastern coasts, these metallic whispers have ignited a firestorm of speculation. Could ancient Roman ships have crossed the Atlantic, intentionally or otherwise, long before the age of Columbus? The most famous of these discoveries occurred in 1974, when a fisherman dredged up a small trove of Roman coins off the coast of Venezuela. Dated between the reigns of Emperors Augustus and Nero, roughly the 1st century CE, the coins bore the unmistakable profiles of rulers who presided over an empire stretching from Britain to Egypt. How did they end up thousands of miles from Rome's nearest port? Skeptics argue they could be modern losses, perhaps dropped by a collector or washed overboard from a ship carrying antiquities. But supporters counter that some finds, like a 3rd century coin unearthed beneath undisturbed layers at a Native American site in Maine, were buried in context suggesting much earlier arrival. Then there's the Bay of Jars in Brazil, where divers have reportedly recovered amphorae, Roman storage jars amidst the wreckage of what some claim could be an ancient ship. While no definitive Roman hull has been identified, the sheer volume of Mediterranean-style pottery fragments raises eyebrows. Could a storm have blown a Roman trading vessel off course, sending it spiraling into the Atlantic currents that eventually lead to the Americas? Ancient writers like Plutarch even hinted at such possibilities, describing legendary islands beyond the Pillars of Hercules where intrepid sailors might drift. But the biggest obstacle to the Roman hypothesis remains the absence of a smoking gun. Unlike the Norse at Eland's Ox Meadows, there's no Roman settlement, no inscription, no cache of tools to confirm their presence. Roman shipbuilding technology, while advanced for coastal and Mediterranean travel, wasn't designed for open ocean voyages. Their galleys relied on oars and square sails effective for short hops between ports, but ill-suited for surviving the tempests of the Atlantic. Even if a ship did drift westward, the odds of surviving the journey, let alone making landfall, seem vanishingly slim. Yet history loves its outliers. In 1957, a single Roman coin was found beneath a centuries-old stone wall on an island in Maine, its patina and wear suggesting centuries in the ground. In 2016, another surfaced during an excavation of a Native American midden in Texas. While mainstream archaeologists dismiss these as anomalies, perhaps traded through later European contact, the pattern keeps the debate alive. What often goes unmentioned is the broader context of Roman exploration. At its height, Rome's reach extended to the Canary Islands and possibly the Azores, putting their ships within striking distance of Atlantic currents that flow toward the Caribbean. Could a vessel carrying wine or olive oil to these outposts have been swept away, its crew surviving just long enough to leave behind a few scattered coins? The idea isn't impossible, but without more than a handful of disputed artifacts, it remains a captivating what-if rather than settled history. Perhaps the most enduring lesson of the Roman coin mystery isn't about proving contact, but about how easily small objects can traverse time and space. A coin lost in a marketplace in Pompeii might resurface in a Brazilian riverbed 2 millennia later, not because of ancient sailors, but through the unpredictable currents of trade, war, or even modern tourism. Each discovery forces us to weigh Occam's razor against the thrilling possibility that history's boundaries are more porous than we think. And until someone unearths a Roman mosaic beneath a Mayan pyramid, the truth will remain as elusive as the tides that carried these coins ashore. Buried in a Native American burial mound in eastern Tennessee, the Bat Creek Stone might be one of the most hotly contested artifacts in pre-Columbian studies. Unearthed in 1889 by the Smithsonian's Mound Survey Project, this small, crescent-shaped stone bears an inscription that, when turned upside down, appears to spell out a phrase in ancient Paleo-Hebrew, for the Judeans or for Judah. If genuine, the implications are staggering evidence of Hebrew-speaking visitors to North America centuries before European contact. But like so many artifacts in this field, the stone sits at the center of a storm, with scholars fiercely divided over whether it's a groundbreaking discovery or an elaborate hoax. The case for authenticity hinges on 2 key points. First, the inscription style closely matches known Paleo-Hebrew script from the 1st or 2nd century CE, a period when Jewish diaspora communities were scattered across the Mediterranean. Proponents like Hebrew epigrapher Cyrus Gordon argued the letter forms were too precise to be a coincidence, suggesting someone familiar with ancient Semitic writing carved them. Second, the stone was found alongside wooden ear spools that, when radiocarbon dated in the 1970s, yielded an age around 45 to 200 CE, a timeline that would place it squarely in the era of Roman Judea. Could a group of Jewish sailors, perhaps fleeing Roman persecution, have crossed the Atlantic and integrated with indigenous communities? Yet skepticism runs just as deep. Critics highlight the stone's murky excavation history. The mound where it was found had been previously disturbed, and the Smithsonian team's records were notoriously inconsistent. Worse, the stone's discoverer, John Emmett, was a known opium user whose field methods were questioned even by his contemporaries. Some linguists argue the inscription is a clumsy imitation of Hebrew, with letters either backwards, inverted, or misaligned, mistakes unlikely for a native scribe. And then there's the curious fact that the inscription only resembles Hebrew when flipped. Right side up, it looks like gibberish, the most damning theory. That the stone was a deliberate forgery, possibly inspired by the 19th century obsession with lost tribes of Israel theories. At the time, many Euro-Americans believed indigenous peoples were descendants of biblical Israelites, a myth used to justify colonization. Could someone, perhaps even Emmett himself, have planted the stone to confirm these popular but racist ideas? Modern analyses add fuel to this fire. In 2020, researchers using advanced imaging noted tool marks inconsistent with ancient carving techniques, suggesting the inscription was made with 19th century metal tools. But here's where the story twists. Even if the Bat Creek stone is a hoax, it opens a window into a very real historical possibility: transatlantic contact between the Americas and the ancient Mediterranean. We know the Phoenicians, close neighbors and trading partners of the Hebrews, sailed as far as Britain and West Africa. Their ships were certainly capable of oceanic travel, and accidental crossings, while unlikely, aren't impossible. A storm-blown vessel, a crew pushed off course. History is full of such accidents. The difference is that most leave no trace. What makes the Bat Creek stone so compelling isn't just the question of its authenticity, but what it reveals about our hunger for connection. Whether it's a genuine artifact or a clever fake, it speaks to a deeper truth. The human story is vast, messy, and full of surprises. For every Bat Creek stone debunked, there might be a dozen undiscovered clues waiting in the soil, each one a potential thread in the tangled web of our shared past. And until we find them, the stone remains a riddle, whispering questions we're still trying to answer. On the Pacific coast of Ecuador, archaeologists made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the study of ancient cultures. Fragments of pottery dating back over 5,000 years, bearing a striking resemblance to artifacts from a place halfway across the world, Japan's Jomon period. The Valdivia pottery, with its distinctive cord-marked designs and intricate patterns, looks almost identical to ceramics produced by Japan's prehistoric Jomon culture around the same time. The similarities are so uncanny that some researchers have dared to ask, could ancient Japanese fishermen have crossed the Pacific, intentionally or otherwise, and left their mark on South America millennia before Columbus? The theory hinges on more than just pottery. Valdivia and Jomon vessels share unique decorative techniques: cord-wrapped paddle impressions, shell-edged designs, and even similar firing methods. Both cultures also produced small, female figurines with nearly identical poses and features. To the untrained eye, these artifacts could easily be mistaken for pieces of the same civilization, separated not by culture but by an ocean. Proponents of the Trans-Pacific connection point to the Kuroshio Current, a powerful ocean stream that flows from Japan toward the Americas. Could a disabled Jomon fishing boat have been swept across the Pacific, carrying survivors who then influenced local pottery traditions? But here's where the plot thickens. Most mainstream archaeologists dismiss the idea, arguing that pottery emerged independently in multiple regions worldwide. After all, the oldest known ceramics come from China, not Japan or Ecuador, proof that humans can arrive at similar innovations without direct contact. The Valdivia culture's development shows gradual, local evolution, with no sudden technological leaps that might suggest outside influence. Even the figurines, while visually similar, serve different cultural purposes. Jaman statues often depict spiritual beings, while Valdivia's seem tied to fertility rituals. Yet the debate refuses to die, and for good reason. In the 1950s, ethnographer Betty Meggers famously championed the Japanese connection, arguing the odds of such precise parallels arising independently were astronomically low. More recently, genetic studies of indigenous Ecuadorian populations have revealed traces of rare mitochondrial DNA haplogroups also found in East Asia, though whether these markers arrived via ancient voyages or later migrations remains hotly contested. Perhaps the most intriguing counterpoint comes from experimental archaeology. In the 1990s, a team attempted to replicate the hypothetical journey using a primitive Jaman-style boat. Against all odds, the vessel survived the Kuroshio Current's path, drifting from Japan to the Americas in just under 2 years. While this doesn't prove contact occurred, it shows the journey was physically possible, a tantalizing what-if that keeps the theory alive. What's often overlooked is the Valdivia culture's own ingenuity. Even if Jaman sailors did reach Ecuador, they didn't impose their style, they inspired it. Valdivia pottery quickly evolved beyond its initial similarities, developing unique forms and motifs that flourished for centuries. That creativity speaks to a deeper truth. Human cultures don't need isolation to innovate, nor contact to borrow. Whether by chance or design, the echoes between Valdivia and Jaman remind us that great ideas can ripple across continents, and sometimes the most fascinating connections are the ones we can't quite prove. Rising from the heart of Newport, Rhode Island, the enigmatic stone tower known as the Newport Tower has sparked debates for centuries. Standing 28 feet tall with its distinctive arches and cylindrical shape, this mysterious structure doesn't quite fit the architectural norms of colonial New England. Some claim it's a relic of Viking explorers, pointing to its resemblance to medieval European round churches like those in Scandinavia. Others whisper of Knights Templar, secret builders fleeing persecution, or even Portuguese navigators who might have charted these coasts long before the pilgrims arrived. The tower's design is undeniably odd for 17th century America. Its 8 supporting columns and central fireplace align with Norse construction techniques, while the orientation of its windows suggests possible astronomical significance. Features more at home in a 12th century Viking outpost than a colonial windmill. Proponents of the Pre-Columbian theory highlight the tower's mortar, which contains crushed shells, a technique common in medieval Europe but rare in early colonial buildings. Even its location, perched on a hill with sweeping views of Narragansett Bay, feels strategic for navigation or defense, not milling grain. Yet dendrochronology, the science of dating tree rings, throws cold water on these romantic theories. Samples taken from the tower's mortar point to a construction date around 1675, squarely in the colonial era. Historical records mention Benedict Arnold, not the infamous traitor, but his wealthy ancestor owning the land and possibly building the structure as a windmill or observatory. Skeptics argue that eccentric colonial architects could have borrowed European styles, creating a quirky local landmark without any connection to ancient voyages. But here's where the plot thickens. In the 1940s, a researcher named Philip Means uncovered a startling detail. A Swedish map from the 1600s labels the Newport area as Vinland. the same name the Norse gave to their North American settlements. Could the tower have been a later Norse construction, or even a colonial replica of a much older Viking site? The absence of any definitive colonial records explaining its purpose leaves room for doubt. If it was just a windmill, why does no period document describe it as such? The tower's mysteries multiply when you consider the broader context. Portuguese explorer Miguel Corte Real vanished off the coast of New England in 1502, and some believe his crew might have built the tower as a navigational aid. Meanwhile, Templar enthusiasts point to the tower's alleged alignment with sacred geometry, suggesting hidden symbolism. Yet for every tantalizing clue, there's a counter-argument. The tower's stonework, while unusual, matches other 17th-century English masonry, and its circular design wasn't entirely unknown in colonial architecture, just rare. What makes the Newport Tower so compelling isn't just the question of its origins, but what it represents about the gaps in our historical record. Even if science leans toward a colonial date, the structure's strangeness forces us to confront how much we still don't know about early transatlantic connections. Whether it's a Viking relic, a Templar beacon, or simply a colonial oddity, the tower stands as a silent challenge, a reminder that history's boundaries are rarely as solid as its stone walls. In the arid soil of Chile's El Arenal archaeological site, a discovery emerged that might rewrite the history of two continents' chicken bones. Not just any chicken bones, these dated back to between 1300 and 1450 CE, centuries before Europeans set foot in South America. But what made them extraordinary was their DNA. When scientists analyzed the genetic material, it matched not local wildfowl, but chickens from Polynesia, thousands of miles across the Pacific. If verified, this tiny fragment of evidence could be the smoking gun proving Polynesians reached the Americas and left behind more than just stories. The implications are staggering. Chickens weren't native to the Americas. They were introduced by Europeans after 1492. So how did Polynesian chickens end up in pre-Columbian Chile? The most compelling explanation is that Polynesian voyagers brought them. These weren't accidental castaways. Polynesians deliberately transported chickens, pigs, and other animals as part of their colonization strategy, a practice documented across the Pacific. Finding their chickens in South America suggests the journey was intentional, perhaps part of a trading network or exploratory mission, but skeptics aren't convinced. Some argue the radiocarbon dating could be off, contaminated by modern carbon or mislabeled samples. Others point out that chicken bones are fragile and prone to displacement. Could they have been mixed into older layers by natural processes? Even the genetic link, while strong, isn't absolute without more bones from other sites. It's hard to rule out the chance of a one-off event. The debate gets even thornier when you consider how chickens might have traveled. Polynesians were master navigators, but the journey from, say, Easter Island to Chile spans over 2,000 miles of open ocean. Could a storm have blown a canoe off course, carrying not just sailors but their livestock to an unknown shore? Or does the presence of chickens hint at something more deliberate, a sustained effort to explore or even settle? Then there's the bigger picture. Chickens alone wouldn't prove contact, but they're part of a growing web of clues. Sweet potatoes, shared words, and now poultry, all threads pointing toward a connection. Yet absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. If Polynesians did reach South America, why haven't we found more of their artifacts? No canoes, no tools, no definitive traces of their presence beyond a few scattered bones and plants. What makes this mystery so gripping isn't just the question of who brought the chickens. It's what their presence tells us about human curiosity and resilience. Whether by accident or design, these bones whisper of a world where the ocean wasn't a barrier but a highway, and if Polynesians could cross it, who else might have tried? The chickens of El Arenal may not have the final word, but they're pecking at the door of history, demanding we reconsider what's possible. High on the bluffs above the Missouri River, the Mandan people built earth lodge villages that astonished early European explorers. With their round, fortified homes and bustling trade networks, they seemed unlike any other indigenous nation encountered on the Great Plains. But what really caught the attention of settlers were the stories whispers that these people might be descendants of a far older voyage, one that sailed not from Spain or England, but from the misty coasts of Wales. The legend begins with Prince Madoc, a medieval Welsh nobleman said to have fled political turmoil in the 12th century by sailing west into the unknown. According to folklore, Madoc and his followers landed on distant shores, mingling with local populations and leaving behind traces of their language and customs. By the 1800s, European observers claimed to see those traces in the Mandan, their light-skinned members, their circular boats reminiscent of Welsh coracles, even words that sounded suspiciously Celtic. One explorer insisted the Mandan word for boat, kui, was a direct carryover from the Welsh cwch. Yet for all the romantic allure of this theory, hard evidence remains elusive. Modern DNA studies of Mandan descendants show no unusual genetic links to Europe, only the expected markers of indigenous North American ancestry. Linguists, too, have debunked the supposed Welsh connections, pointing out that random word similarities occur between unrelated languages all the time. Even the Mandan's distinctive appearance, sometimes cited as proof of European ancestry, fits comfortably within the range of natural variation among native peoples. So why does the Madoc myth endure? Part of its staying power lies in the human love for a good origin story, the idea that history might hide a secret chapter where cultures collided in unexpected ways. But there's also a darker thread. In the 19th century, the Madoc legend was weaponized to justify colonization, suggesting that white settlers weren't displacing indigenous nations but returning to lands their ancestors had already discovered. This twisted logic reveals how easily folklore can be co-opted for political ends. The Mandan themselves have their own rich origin stories, none of which mention Welsh princes. Their oral traditions speak of emerging from the earth near the Missouri, and archaeological evidence confirms they've lived in the region for at least 1,000 years. Far from needing outside influence, they were master engineers, farmers, and diplomats who thrived in a harsh landscape long before Europeans arrived. Perhaps the real lesson of the Mandan Madoc myth isn't about ancient voyages, but about how we project our own fantasies onto the past. When we scour indigenous cultures for signs of European contact, we risk overshadowing their own innovations and resilience. The Mandan didn't need Welsh sailors to build their world, they crafted it themselves, layer by layer, just as the earth lodges they called home rose from the prairie soil. And that truth, though less fanciful than a Lost Prince's saga, is far more extraordinary. Among all the maps that challenge our understanding of ancient exploration, few are as baffling as the Piri Reis chart of 1513. Drawn by the Ottoman admiral and cartographer Piri Reis, this fragmentary world map depicts the Atlantic Ocean with startling precision, not just the familiar coasts of Europe and Africa, but the eastern shores of South America, complete with rivers and mountain ranges that wouldn't be officially discovered by Europeans for decades. But the real bombshell lies at the bottom of the parchment, a landmass some believe to be Antarctica, drawn centuries before the frozen continent was known to the Western world. How could a 16th century mapmaker have access to such detailed geographical knowledge? And what forgotten sources might have inspired him? The mystery deepens when you examine Reis's own notes. He openly credits his work to older maps, including those used by Christopher Columbus, along with what he calls very ancient sources from the time of Alexander the Great. Some researchers speculate these lost references could trace back to Phoenician, Arab, or even pre-Columbian voyages civilizations that might have charted the Americas long before recorded history. The map's depiction of Antarctica is particularly controversial. While skeptics argue the landmass could be a distorted South America or simply artistic license, others note its uncanny alignment with modern surveys of Antarctica's ice-free coastline, a shape hidden under glaciers for millennia. If accurate, it implies the existence of pre-glacial cartographic knowledge, something no known civilization should possess. Yet the Reis map isn't alone. Other medieval charts, like the Orontius Phineus map of 1531 and the Zeno map of the North Atlantic, show similarly puzzling details. The Orontius map portrays Antarctica with rivers and mountains, as if drawn during an ice-free period, while the Zeno map includes phantom islands that match Norse sailing routes. Could these anomalies be evidence of a wider tradition of lost geography, preserved in fragments and copied by later cartographers? Mainstream historians urge caution. They point out that Reis's South America, while impressive, contains errors, like an exaggerated eastward bulge in Brazil suggesting patchwork reconstruction rather than flawless ancient data. Their Antarctica theory faces even harsher criticism. Without the original source maps, there's no way to confirm whether the landmass was intended to represent the southern continent or a speculative land blob common in medieval cartography. Even the idea of ice-free Antarctic mapping relies on controversial geological timelines, placing such knowledge in a hypothetical ancient era no known culture could document. What makes the Reis enigma so enduring isn't just the question of its accuracy, but what it reveals about how knowledge travels and disappears. Maps are more than navigation tools, they're palimpsests layered with the insights and errors of generations. Whether Reis tapped into a forgotten well of exploration or simply pieced together sailors' tales and guesswork, his map forces us to confront how much of the past might be hidden in plain sight, inked onto parchment, waiting to be decoded. And until we find those elusive source maps, the debate will rage on. Is the Reis chart a window into lost history, or just a beautiful mosaic of half-remembered voyages? Either way, it's a reminder that the edges of our historical maps are still dotted with dragons, and the truth might be stranger than any legend. In April 1909, the front page of the Arizona Gazette carried a story that would ignite a century of speculation, a report of an extraordinary discovery deep within the Grand Canyon. According to the article, an expedition led by Smithsonian-backed explorer G.E. Kincaid had stumbled upon a vast underground network of tunnels and chambers, some filled with what appeared to be ancient Egyptian artifacts. Gold tablets etched with hieroglyphics, statues resembling deities like Isis and Osiris, even mummified remains, all allegedly hidden beneath the rugged cliffs of one of America's most iconic landscapes. The story spread like wildfire, offering a tantalizing possibility. Had an ancient Egyptian civilization somehow crossed the Atlantic and carved out a secret foothold in the heart of North America? The details read like something out of an adventure novel. Kincaid claimed to have found the entrance while rafting the Colorado River, spotting a cavern high on the canyon wall. After scaling the cliff, he described a labyrinth of passages leading to a central chamber filled with relics unlike anything seen in the Americas. most striking was the alleged presence of Egyptian iconography, symbols and artwork that bore no resemblance to indigenous traditions. If true, it would have been the archaeological find of the century, rewriting history books and forcing scholars to reconsider everything they knew about transoceanic contact. But here's where the story unravels. No physical evidence from Kincaid's expedition has ever surfaced, no artifacts, no photographs, not even a credible excavation report. The Smithsonian denies any involvement, and searches for the supposed cavern have turned up empty. Mainstream archaeologists dismiss the tale as an elaborate hoax, possibly concocted to sell newspapers or attract tourists to the fledgling state of Arizona. Even the Gazette's own credibility is suspect. The paper was known for sensationalism, and no follow-up stories ever appeared. Yet the legend persists, fueled by the canyon's own aura of mystery. The Grand Canyon has long been a magnet for unconventional theories, from lost civilizations to interdimensional portals. Its sheer scale layers of rock, revealing nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history, invite speculation about what might lie hidden in its depths. And while the Egyptian connection is almost certainly fiction, the story taps into a deeper truth. Humans have always been drawn to the idea of forgotten worlds, especially those that challenge the official narrative. What's fascinating isn't just the claim itself, but why it resonates. The Grand Canyon's indigenous peoples, like the Hopi and Havasupai, have their own rich histories tied to the land, stories of emergence and migration that span millennia. Yet the allure of a mysterious foreign presence reflects a recurring pattern: the tendency to overlook Native American ingenuity in favor of exotic, outsider-driven narratives. The irony is that the canyon's real wonders, the ancestral Puebloan ruins, the intricate irrigation systems, the oral traditions that have endured for generations, are every bit as awe-inspiring as any imagined Egyptian outpost. Perhaps the greatest lesson of the Grand Canyon Egyptian myth isn't about hidden tombs or lost relics, but about how easily a single newspaper article can shape decades of speculation. In an age before fact-checking and digital archives, stories like Kincaid's could take on a life of their own, blurring the line between fact and folklore. And while the truth may never lie buried in those crimson cliffs, the tale endures as a reminder of our endless fascination with the unknown and the stories we tell to fill the gaps. Deep in the highlands of Bolivia, near the shores of Lake Titicaca, a farmer uncovered an artifact that would ignite one of archaeology's most heated debates: the Fuente Magna bowl. This ornate ceramic vessel, roughly the size of a large soup bowl, is etched with intricate symbols that bear a striking resemblance to ancient cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system used by the Sumerians of Mesopotamia over 4,000 years ago. At first glance, the idea seems impossible. How could a script from the cradle of civilization, thousands of miles across oceans and continents, end up inscribed on pottery in the Andes? Yet for proponents of pre-Columbian contact theories, the bowl is no coincidence, it's a smoking gun. The inscriptions on the Fuente Magna bowl are the heart of the controversy. Some researchers, like linguist Clyde Winters, claim to have deciphered portions of the text as a Proto-Sumerian dialect, with symbols referencing deities like Nisaba, the goddess of writing. If accurate, this would imply that Sumerian explorers or traders not only reached South America but interacted with local cultures, leaving behind a tangible record of their presence. The bowl's discovery near Titicaca adds another layer of intrigue. The lake region is already steeped in mystery, home to ruins like Tiwanaku, whose megalithic architecture hints at advanced engineering long before the Inca. Could these civilizations have had outside influences? Skeptics, however, aren't buying it. mainstream archaeologists point out glaring issues with the Fuente Magna narrative. First, there's the bowl's provenance. Unlike artifacts excavated in controlled digs, it surfaced without clear context, making it impossible to date or verify its origins scientifically. The symbols, while visually similar to cuneiform, lack the precise linguistic patterns of authentic Mesopotamian writing. Some experts argue they're more likely to be decorative motifs or even modern additions, perhaps carved by someone familiar with cuneiform but not fluent in it. Even the bowl style doesn't match known Sumerian or Bolivian ceramic. It's an outlier in both traditions, which raises red flags about its authenticity. Then there's the logistical problem. Sumerians were master traders, but their seafaring technology was built for rivers and coastal voyages, not transoceanic journeys. While they sailed the Persian Gulf and possibly the Indian Ocean, no evidence suggests they had ships capable of surviving the Atlantic or Pacific crossings. And even if a Sumerian vessel had drifted off course, why would its crew carve their script onto a bowl in Bolivia, thousands of miles inland? The absence of other Sumerian artifacts in the region, no tools, no settlements, no corroborating inscriptions makes the Fuente Magna stand alone, a single puzzle piece with no matching edges. Yet the bowl's allure persists, partly because it taps into a broader fascination with lost connections. Ancient cultures worldwide developed similar symbols independently. Zigzags, circles, and geometric patterns are universal human expressions. Could the Fuente Magna's cuneiform be a case of parallel invention, like pyramids appearing in both Egypt and Mesoamerica? Or does it reflect something more profound, a fleeting encounter between distant civilizations, a moment of contact lost to time? The debate over the Fuente Magna bowl isn't just about archaeology, it's about how we interpret the shadows of history. For every scholar who sees a hoax or a misidentification, there's another who glimpses a possibility, however faint, that our ancestors' worlds were more interconnected than we ever imagined. Until someone unearths a Sumerian shipwreck on the shores of Lake Titicaca, the bowl will remain what it is, a riddle wrapped in clay, daring us to reconsider the boundaries of the ancient world. Beneath the surface of our skin lies a hidden archive of human history, strands of DNA that carry echoes of ancient journeys, forgotten encounters, and migrations lost to time. In recent years, geneticists have unlocked startling clues buried in the genomes of indigenous American populations, revealing connections that stretch across oceans and millennia. One of the most baffling discoveries, traces of genetic material linking native Amazonian groups to distant populations in Australia and Melanesia, a finding that defies conventional narratives of how the Americas were peopled. The story begins with a peculiar genetic signature known as the Ipacaira population, identified in tribes like the Surui and Caraxiana of Brazil. These groups carry DNA segments that closely match those found in indigenous Australians and Papuans groups separated by the vast Pacific. At first glance, this might suggest direct contact between these populations long after the initial peopling of the Americas, but the timeline complicates things. These genetic markers appear to stem from a much older divergence, possibly dating back over 15,000 years, when ancestral populations in Asia split into distinct branches, one migrating toward Australia, another toward the Americas. Yet not all genetic evidence fits neatly into this ancient framework. In the Arctic, the Dorset and Thule peoples' ancestors of modern Inuit showed genetic ties to Siberians that align with known migrations across the Bering Strait. But further south, in places like coastal British Columbia, studies have detected faint but persistent genetic links to Polynesians, reigniting debates about transoceanic voyages. The most compelling data comes from the Zenu people of Colombia. whose genomes contain segments shared with Polynesian populations, coinciding neatly with the archaeological evidence of pre-Columbian sweet potatoes and chickens. Critics argue that these signals could be statistical noise or remnants of much older population movements. After all, DNA mutates and drifts over generations, and isolated similarities don't always imply direct contact. But proponents counter that some genetic matches are too precise to dismiss. For example, a rare mitochondrial haplogroup called B4A1, a common in Polynesia, has been found in indigenous Chilean remains dated to the 14th century, centuries before European arrival. Could this be the genetic footprint of a Polynesian voyage, preserved in the bones of those who met on distant shores? The science is far from settled. New studies using advanced techniques like whole genome sequencing are uncovering layers of complexity, revealing that the peopling of the Americas wasn't a single event but a series of migrations, some of which might have taken unexpected routes. Some researchers even speculate about a ghost population, an unknown group that branched off early from East Asian ancestors, leaving faint traces in modern genomes. What's clear is that every genetic clue forces us to rethink the boundaries of ancient human movement. Whether these markers reflect chance encounters, deliberate voyages, or deep ancestral splits, they paint a picture of a world far more interconnected than we ever imagined. And as technology peels back more layers of our DNA, one thing is certain: the story of the Americas is still being written, one nucleotide at a time. Stories of great floods, serpent gods, and world trees echo across continents, whispered in languages separated by oceans and centuries. The Aztecs spoke of a deluge that wiped away the fourth sun, while Mesopotamian tablets told of Gilgamesh and a catastrophic storm sent by angry deities. Half a world away, indigenous Australian Dreamtime legends describe ancestral beings who escaped rising waters by climbing to high ground, a narrative startlingly similar to the biblical tale of Noah's Ark. These shared myths aren't just curiosities, they're fragments of a puzzle that has scholars locked in debate. Are these parallels proof of ancient transoceanic contact, or do they reveal something deeper about the human psyche? Take the symbol of the feathered serpent, a motif that slithers through cultures with no known connection. In Mesoamerica, Quetzalcoatl's sword as a deity of wisdom and wind, his plumed coils adorning temple walls. Over in ancient Egypt, the Ouroboros, a serpent swallowing its own tail, symbolized eternal cycles, while Hindu texts describe the Naga, divine serpents capable of flight. Even Norse mythology featured Jörmungandr, the world-encircling snake. The sheer ubiquity of serpent symbolism has led some researchers to propose a lost global cult or early maritime traders spreading religious ideas. But skeptics counter that snakes are universal predators, their sinuous forms and lethal power naturally inspiring awe in cultures worldwide. Flood myths present an even thornier mystery. Over 500 deluge stories exist across 6 continents, many sharing uncanny details, warnings from higher powers, survival in vessels, and birds sent to scout for land. The Maya Popolvuh describes a watery destruction so complete that only a handful of humans remain to repopulate the world, an eerie mirror of Mesopotamian and Hebrew accounts. Geologists point to real catastrophic floods like the Black Sea inundation 7,000 years ago or post-glacial sea level rises as possible catalysts, events traumatic enough to etch themselves into collective memory. But could these stories have spread through contact? The Maori of New Zealand, isolated for centuries, still recount the legend of Tohaki, who survived a devastating flood by clinging to a mountaintop. If their ancestors carried this tale across the Pacific, does it hint at even older, shared origins? Then there's the cosmic axis, the world tree or pillar linking heaven, earth, and the underworld. The Norse had Yggdrasil, its roots gnawed by dragons. Siberian shamans spoke of a birch tree ascending to the spirit world, while the Maya revered the ceiba tree as a bridge between realms. Even the Amazonian Yanomami describe a great tree that once connected all layers of existence. Such specific similarities have fueled theories of a proto-religion carried by early human migrations or later contact between seafaring cultures. Yet cognitive anthropologists argue these symbols might arise independently from universal human experiences. Trees as sources of shelter and sustenance, serpents as both danger and renewal, floods as nature's ultimate reset button. The debate crystallizes around two schools of thought. Diffusionists see these parallels as breadcrumbs left by ancient voyagers, Phoenicians hugging coastlines, Polynesians riding currents, or even Ice Age Siberians traversing now submerged land bridges. They point to concrete evidence like the spread of sweet potatoes or chicken DNA as proof that ideas could travel with goods. Isolationists, however, emphasize humanity's shared cognitive toolkit. Faced with similar challenges, storms, predators, the night sky cultures arrived at similar metaphors without ever meeting. The human brain, they argue, is wired to find patterns, to explain chaos through story, and to venerate what it fears. Perhaps the truth lies somewhere in between. While not every shared myth requires a sunken continent or forgotten fleet, some connections are too precise to dismiss as chance. The Ojibwe story of the 7 grandfathers, wise beings who brought sacred teachings, bears a striking resemblance to the Pleiades myths of Greece and Japan, all cultures that linked this star cluster with divine wisdom. Could this reflect an ancient astronomical observation passed down through generations, or is it proof that when humans gaze at the same stars, they weave similar tales? What makes these cultural echoes so compelling isn't just the question of their origin, but what they reveal about our need to make sense of the world. Whether through contact or collective imagination, these recurring motifs remind us that beneath the surface of our differences, humanity has always spoken a common language, one of wonder, fear, and the unshakable urge to explain the inexplicable. And in that shared mystery, we might find the most profound connection of all. Imagine standing on the shore of a vast, uncharted ocean with nothing but the stars above and the waves below. No GPS, no maps, not even a compass to guide you. Yet somehow, ancient cultures not only dreamed of crossing these waters but repeatedly accomplished the impossible, navigating thousands of miles with nothing but ingenuity and observation. The Polynesians, for instance, didn't just stumble upon remote islands by accident. They mastered the art of wayfinding, a system so precise it allowed them to colonize the Pacific's scattered specks of land like a celestial roadmap. By memorizing the positions of over 200 stars, tracking the subtle shifts of ocean swells, and even interpreting the flight patterns of birds, they transformed the open ocean from a terrifying void into a familiar highway. Then there were the Vikings, whose legendary sunstones, crystals of calcite or cordierite, could pinpoint the sun's location even through dense cloud cover or the long twilight of Arctic summers. By holding these stones to the sky and rotating them until the light polarized into a distinct pattern, Norse sailors could determine direction with eerie accuracy. Combined with their detailed mental maps of coastal landmarks and whale migration routes, these tools turned the North Atlantic into a navigable corridor rather than an impassable barrier. But how did these techniques translate to longer, more perilous journeys? The answer lies in the ocean itself. Ancient mariners learned to read currents like highways, riding the Kuroshio current from Japan to the Americas, or harnessing the trade winds that curve predictably across the Atlantic. Polynesians used the tilapa, underwater lightning like streaks of bioluminescence that radiate from islands, invisible to the untrained eye but unmistakable to seasoned navigators. These natural signposts, combined with an encyclopedic knowledge of wave refraction and cloud formations, turned the sea into a living atlas. Critics often argue that without physical evidence like surviving navigational instruments, these feats are speculative. But modern recreations have settled the debate. In 1976, the Hoax, a replica Polynesian canoe, sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti using only traditional wayfinding methods, no charts, no sextants. The voyage didn't just prove it was possible, it underscored the sophistication of indigenous knowledge, honed over generations and passed down through chants and apprenticeships. Similarly, Viking sunstone replicas have been tested in foggy conditions, consistently guiding ships within a degree of true north. What's often overlooked is the role of failure in these stories. For every successful voyage, countless others likely ended in disaster, ships blown off course, crews lost to storms or starvation. Yet the few that succeeded reshaped continents. Whether by design or desperation, these explorers pushed the limits of human capability, proving that the ocean was never the impenetrable wall we once imagined. Their legacy isn't just in the lands they reached, but in the audacity to try, armed with nothing but intuition, courage, and the unshakable belief that the horizon was never the end, only the beginning. Mainstream archaeology operates like a courtroom, demanding hard evidence beyond reasonable doubt before rewriting history's accepted narratives. When it comes to pre-Columbian transoceanic contact, the bar is set exceptionally high, and for good reason. The field has weathered its share of hoaxes, from the infamous Michigan relics to the crystal skulls, once touted as ancient Mesoamerican masterpieces. Each time a bold claim collapses under scrutiny, it reinforces the discipline's cautious approach. But this skepticism isn't just about guarding against fraud, it's a matter of methodology. Archaeology relies on context. An artifact's true significance lies not just in its form, but in where it's found, what layers surround it, and whether it fits into a broader cultural pattern. A single Norse coin in Maine might be intriguing, but without corroborating evidence, a settlement, tools, or skeletal remains, it's an outlier, not a paradigm shifter. This rigor has paid off. Take the Vinland sagas. For centuries, they were dismissed as folklore until archaeologists uncovered Elance Orcs meadows in 1960, matching the text's descriptions down to the iron nails and butternut shells. That discovery succeeded because it ticked every box: physical remains, carbon dating, and a clear link to documented Norse material culture. By contrast, artifacts like the Bat Creek stone or the Fuente Magna bowl often lack this chain of custody. They surface without stratified excavation records, making it impossible to rule out modern interference. As one Smithsonian curator put it, extraordinary claims require extraordinary context. Yet some argue the field's standards might be too rigid. Linguistics and genetics have unveiled tantalizing connections, like the Polynesian Kumara echoing Quechua's Kayuma, that traditional archaeology struggles to ignore. New technologies are also shifting the debate. Advanced sediment analysis can now trace a stone tool's origin to specific quarries, while isotopic studies of skeletal remains reveal ancient migration routes invisible to earlier researchers. When applied to disputed artifacts, these tools could either confirm long-dismissed theories or finally debunk them. The recent re-evaluation of the Kensington Runestone using 3D scanning exemplifies this potential, revealing tool marks consistent with medieval Norse chisels, though even this hasn't fully swayed the academic consensus. Underlying these debates is a tension between two ways of knowing. Indigenous oral histories, for instance, often describe events millennia old with startling precision, like the Kootenai people's tales of volcanic eruptions later confirmed by geological records. Yet without physical evidence, these narratives rarely satisfy archaeological standards. The result is a paradoxical gap. Science demands proof, but proof often erodes over centuries, leaving only echoes in stories and symbols. The resistance isn't just academic, it's cultural. For generations, textbooks framed the Americas as isolated until 1492, a narrative that's hard to dislodge. When new evidence emerges, it challenges not just facts but identities. The idea that indigenous civilizations might have interacted with outsiders independently of Europe unsettles traditional power dynamics, much like the once controversial recognition of Clovis people's ancestors arriving via Beringia over 13,000 years ago. Change comes slowly, but it does come. 50 years ago, the notion of Polynesians reaching South America was fringe. Today, the chicken bones and sweet potato DNA have nudged it toward acceptance. What's often forgotten is that skepticism and curiosity aren't opposites, they're partners. Every archaeologist dreams of finding the next Rosetta Stone, the artifact that cracks history's code wide open. But until then, the field's caution serves as a safeguard, ensuring that when the next great discovery emerges, it won't be another footnote in the annals of pseudoscience, but a key that genuinely unlocks the past. The truth is out there, buried in soil or encoded in DNA, waiting for the tools and the patience to reveal it. And when that happens, even the staunchest skeptics will have to listen. History is littered with tantalizing fakes, artifacts so convincing they've tricked scholars for decades before their true origins came to light. Among the most notorious are the Michigan relics, a collection of over 3,000 supposedly ancient tablets unearthed in the late 1800s. Carved with cryptic symbols and scenes of biblical figures mingling with Native Americans, they were hailed by some as proof of lost Israelite tribes in pre-Columbian North America. But the truth was far less glamorous. The relics were the work of a local farmer named James Scotford, who used simple tools to etch pseudo-Hebrew into soft clay before baking them for an aged look. His forgeries were so persuasive they duped even respected antiquarians, illustrating how easily wishful thinking can override skepticism. Then there's the Davenport tablets, discovered in Iowa in 1877. These inscribed slate slabs appeared to depict a bizarre fusion of Egyptian hieroglyphs and indigenous American imagery, sparking theories of transatlantic contact. But linguists quickly spotted the red flags. The hieroglyphs were a jumble of mismatched symbols copied straight from 19th century textbooks, some even upside down or out of context. The tablets were likely crafted by a group of local pranksters, yet their legacy lingered, muddying legitimate research for years. What makes these hoaxes so damaging isn't just their deception, but how they weaponize confirmation bias. When the Bat Creek stone surfaced with its Paleo-Hebrew inscription, it fed into a popular 19th century myth that Native Americans were descendants of the lost tribes of Israel, a narrative often used to justify colonization. Similarly, the infamous Los Lunas Decalogue stone, a boulder in New Mexico carved with the Ten Commandments in ancient Hebrew, has been cited as proof of pre-Columbian Semitic presence. Never mind that the script includes modern punctuation and the stone's patina shows signs of recent tool marks. For believers, the desire for the story to be true often outweighs the evidence. Modern technology, however, is shifting the balance. Techniques like scanning electron microscopy can reveal microscopic tool marks betraying an artifact's true age, while patina analysis detects chemical inconsistencies in weathering. When researchers examined the infamous Acambaro figurines, thousands of miniature dinosaur statues allegedly found in Mexico thermoluminescence dating exposed them as modern creations. Yet even science isn't foolproof. The infamous Shroud of Turin debate proves how fiercely people cling to artifacts that resonate with their worldview, regardless of evidence. The line between hoax and misinterpretation isn't always clear. Take the Newark Holy Stones, a set of inscribed objects found in Ohio in the 1860s. While most archaeologists dismiss them as fakes, a vocal minority argues they could be genuine if misidentified. Could they be Masonic artifacts from the colonial era or indigenous ceremonial objects repurposed by settlers? Context is key. An artifact without a clear archaeological layer is like a single puzzle piece with no box to guide its placement. Ultimately, these deceptions serve as cautionary tales, reminding us that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary proof. But they also highlight a deeper truth: our hunger for connection, for stories that bridge cultures and rewrite narratives, can sometimes blur the line between discovery and delusion. The next time a headline-grabbing artifact emerges, the real challenge won't just be verifying its age, but examining our own eagerness to believe. Long before archaeologists began sifting through soil for answers, indigenous cultures preserved their histories through stories, vibrant, living narratives passed down through generations like precious heirlooms. Among these oral traditions, a recurring thread emerges: tales of strangers arriving from distant shores, sometimes as teachers, sometimes as threats, but always as outsiders whose presence left an indelible mark. The Haida of the Pacific Northwest speak of a time when iron people came in floating houses, while the Choctaw tell of pale visitors who descended from the sky. Could these accounts be more than myth? Could they be fragmented memories of real encounters with pre-Columbian voyagers, preserved across centuries of retelling? Consider the Tlingit legend of Kalatuya, a story about a great canoe that appeared near Latuya Bay, carrying people with unusual clothing and tools. Details in the narrative, like descriptions of metal ornaments and woven fabrics, align curiously with what we know of Norse material culture from the same era. Similarly, the Zuni people's oral history describes a cycle of migrations, including encounters with bearded men who arrived from the west, a possible nod to trans-Pacific visitors. These stories aren't isolated. They form patterns that mirror proposed contact timelines, from Polynesian voyages to potential Chinese expeditions. Yet oral histories pose unique challenges for researchers. Unlike pottery shards or carbon-dated bones, they're fluid, adapting to each generation's needs and values. A story about strangers arriving by sea might evolve over centuries, blending historical events with symbolic lessons or spiritual teachings. The Maori tale of Cuyp, for instance, recounts a legendary voyage to New Zealand, but how much of it reflects actual navigation routes, and how much is metaphorical? Without written records, disentangling fact from allegory becomes a delicate dance. Mainstream archaeology often greets these narratives with skepticism, and not without reason. Oral traditions can be susceptible to post-contact influences. After Europeans arrived, indigenous stories might have incorporated new details, making it hard to discern pre-Columbian roots. But dismissing them outright risks repeating past mistakes, like the early scholars who ignored native accounts of volcanic eruptions only to later confirm them through geological evidence. Modern researchers are increasingly collaborating with indigenous knowledge keepers, treating oral histories not as substitutes for physical evidence but as complementary lenses. When the Hautsak Nation's oral histories led archaeologists to a 14,000-year-old coastal village in British Columbia, one of the oldest settlements in North America, it proved the power of merging these worlds. The most compelling cases arise where oral tradition and archaeology converge. In Peru, the Chimu people's legends describe a great flood that destroyed their ancestors' capital. In the 1960s, excavations at Chan uncovered a layer of sea sediments consistent with a catastrophic El Niño event, dating to around 1100 CE, a striking match. Likewise, the Inuit tale of the Tuniat, a people said to have been displaced by Thule ancestors, aligns with archaeological evidence of Dorset culture retreating as the Thule expanded. These aren't just coincidences, they're proof that oral histories can preserve hard truths across millennia. But what of the more controversial claims? The Hopi speak of Bahana, a light-skinned brother who would one day return from the east, a story some link to Welsh Prince Madoc's mythical voyage. The Maya Popol Vuh references a place of 7 caves across the water, which a few researchers speculate could hint at transatlantic contact. Here, the line between cultural memory and creative interpretation blurs. Without corroborating artifacts, such connections remain speculative, though they raise fascinating questions about how widely human imagination can weave similar tales. Perhaps the greatest value of oral histories lies not in proving specific contacts but in challenging the myth of isolation. For too long, the Americas were framed as a pristine wilderness awaiting European discovery, ignoring millennia of dynamic human movement and exchange. These stories remind us that indigenous cultures were never static. They observed, adapted, and recorded their world with precision. Whether the strangers in their tales were real visitors or symbolic representations, the narratives themselves are testaments to resilience, a way of saying, "We were always here, always watching, always remembering." And in that remembering, they offer us a chance to hear history not as a single voice, but as a chorus. Modern explorers have turned the ocean into a laboratory, testing ancient navigation theories with their own hands, and sometimes their lives. Among them, Thor Heyerdahl stands as a towering figure, a man who dared to challenge academic skepticism with a balsa wood raft named Kon-Tiki. In 1947, Heyerdahl and his crew embarked on an audacious journey, drifting from Peru to the Tuamotu Islands on a vessel modeled after pre-Columbian designs. His goal, to prove that South Americans could have settled Polynesia using nothing but the currents and winds available to their ancestors. Against all odds, they succeeded, covering 4,000 miles in 101 days, a feat that forced historians to reconsider the possibilities of ancient seafaring. But Heyerdahl's experiment was just the beginning. In the decades since, others have followed in his wake, each voyage peeling back another layer of mystery. Take the Hoax, a double-hulled Polynesian canoe that sailed from Hawaii to Tahiti in 1976, using only traditional wayfinding techniques. Navigator Mau Piailug, trained in the nearly lost art of Micronesian star navigation, guided the crew without compasses or charts, relying instead on the swell of waves, the flight paths of birds, and the position of stars. Their success didn't just validate Polynesian oral histories, it resurrected an entire cultural legacy, proving that these voyages weren't accidents but deliberate acts of genius. Not every experiment has ended in triumph, though. In 2006, the Abora Roman III, a reed boat modeled after ancient Egyptian designs, attempted to cross the Atlantic from New York to Spain, aiming to demonstrate that Bronze Age traders could have reached the Americas. Storm damage forced the crew to abandon ship, but even in failure, the voyage revealed critical insights. The boat's ability to ride the Canary Current suggested that westward travel was plausible under the right conditions, even if the technology had its limits. These modern adventures do more than test hypotheses, they expose the gaps in our understanding. When Tim Severin retraced the supposed route of St. Brendan, the legendary Irish monk said to have reached North America in the 6th century, his leather-hulled currach survived the icy North Atlantic, challenging assumptions about medieval maritime technology. Yet Severin's journey also highlighted the brutal realities ancient sailors faced: storms that could shred sails, freezing fog that obscured the stars, and the sheer psychological toll of months at sea with no guarantee of landfall. What unites these explorers is their willingness to embrace uncertainty. The Polynesian Voyaging Society's worldwide circumnavigation in the 21st century didn't just showcase navigational skill, it sparked a renaissance in indigenous knowledge, inspiring a new generation to reclaim their seafaring heritage. Meanwhile, projects like the Tangaroa expedition, a modern repeat of Heyerdahl's Kon-Tiki voyage using updated materials, blend old and new, using satellite phones for safety while staying true to ancient principles. The lessons from these journeys are as much about human ingenuity as they are about history. They remind us that the ocean was never a barrier but a connective tissue, its currents weaving together continents long before borders were drawn. And while skeptics may argue that proving a voyage was possible doesn't confirm it happened, these experiments force us to ask a more profound question. In a world where so much has been lost to time, how do we weigh the limits of our imagination against the audacity of the past? Every replica boat that crests a wave is a challenge to the stories we think we know, a reminder that history's edges are still waiting to be explored. The evidence for pre-Columbian visitors isn't a neat puzzle with all the pieces snapped into place. It's more like a mosaic, with some tiles gleaming brightly under scrutiny while others crumble at the slightest touch. Take the Norse settlement at Elant's Orcs Meadows. Here, archaeology and saga align perfectly, offering undeniable proof of Viking boots on North American soil. But then there's the Kensington runestone, its runes whispering of a 14th century Norse expedition deep into Minnesota, yet its authenticity hotly contested. For every solid artifact like Polynesian chicken bones in Chile, there's a Fuente Magna bowl, its cuneiform like inscriptions tantalizing but lacking context. This isn't a binary debate between proof and hoax. It's a spectrum of plausibility where each clue demands its own reckoning. What's striking isn't just the diversity of evidence, but what it reveals about human ingenuity. Whether Polynesian navigators reading the ocean's subtle cues or Phoenician traders riding the Canary Current, these journeys, intentional or accidental, speak to a universal drive to explore. The sweet potatoes spread across the Pacific isn't just a botanical oddity. It's a testament to the audacity of cultures that saw the horizon not as a boundary, but an invitation. Even the failures matter. A ship blown off course, a crew lost to storms. These tragedies remind us that history is written by the survivors, leaving countless voyages forever unrecorded. Yet for all the intrigue, caution remains crucial. The allure of rewriting history has led to forgery and folly, from the Michigan relics to the Acambaro figurines. Archaeology's insistence on rigorous proof isn't stubbornness, it's a safeguard against the seduction of stories we want to believe. But skepticism shouldn't stifle curiosity. When indigenous oral traditions describe strangers arriving by sea or genetic studies reveal unexpected DNA links, these aren't anomalies to dismiss. They're threads begging to be pulled, promising new patterns in the tapestry of the past. So where does that leave us? The truth likely lies somewhere between the textbook certainty of isolation and the romantic vision of globe-trotting ancients. Maybe the Phoenicians never mined copper in Michigan, and perhaps the Bat Creek stone is a hoax, but the Polynesians almost certainly reached South America, and the Norse definitely built turf houses in Newfoundland. These verified contacts alone shatter the myth of a hermetically sealed pre-Columbian world. They force us to ask, if these crossings happened, how many others left no trace? The real takeaway isn't about tallying wins for one theory or another. It's about humility. For centuries, Western academia framed the Americas as static until 1492, ignoring indigenous narratives and downplaying their maritime achievements. Today, as we weigh genetic data against oral histories and experimental voyages against stone inscriptions, we're not just solving puzzles, we're dismantling outdated assumptions. The ocean was never empty and the past was never simple. So what do you think? Are the Olmec heads portraits of African visitors or masterpieces of indigenous artistry? Did Cheng, his treasure fleet, glimpse the California coast, or is the famous map just a later fantasy? The conversation doesn't end here. It evolves with every new discovery, every fresh perspective. Drop your thoughts below, and if you're hungry for more deep dives into history's shadowy corners, hit that subscribe button. After all, the next great revelation might be just one excavation or one daring theory away.